The main gate of the San Diego Naval Medical Center seemed narrower at that hour of the morning, as if the city itself were holding its breath. The white lights of the parking lot reflected in old puddles, and the wind from the Pacific carried the smell of salt mixed with disinfectant. Hannah Carter clutched her name tag in the pocket of her navy blue scrubs and stepped through the automatic doors with the stride of someone who had seen too many nights to believe any would be peaceful. She was American, born in rural Ohio, but her world had turned around, turning its back on bases, hospitals, and airports. She had been a trauma nurse for 7 years, trained to separate noise from urgency, to see what no one wanted to see, the fine line between a life returning and a life slipping away. Even so, that night, an unsettling feeling had accompanied her since the moment she parked her car. It wasn't fear. It was a premonition that something familiar was about to burst through the emergency. Room door like a storm. The radio on the counter crackled before any sirens. Trauma team, prepare, entry in 5, high-ranking military patient, blast injury, unstable condition, command security en route. The receptionist's tone, usually reserved for showing no emotion, betrayed a split second of tension. Hannah was already wearing gloves when the emergency room doors burst open. The stretcher entered, surrounded by men in camouflage uniforms, their faces hard, their eyes watchful. 2 doctors were with her, and behind them a security officer with his hand near his holster as if the hospital were enemy territory. On the stretcher, a large man, his chest bandaged, his skin pale under the fluorescent light, breathed in short bursts. His face was stained with dust and dried blood. Despite the pain, there was something about him that wouldn't give way. The look of someone who was still in control, even broken. "Name?" asked the doctor on duty. "Colonel?" a sergeant replied, hesitating as if the word were a password. Colonel Mason Grant, regimental commander, arrived from Camp Pendleton in an air evacuation. There was an incident during night training. Night training. Hannah heard the phrase as if it came wrapped in plastic. She knew what the military world called certain things when it couldn't call them by their name. She approached with the protocol memorized. "Colonel Grant, I'm Hannah, the nurse in charge here. I'll need to cut your shirt to assess the injury." His eyes met hers. For a second, Hannah saw what wasn't in the report: anger, humiliation, a pain that seemed older than blood. "Get someone else," he growled, his voice coming out like an order in the middle of a battle. "Now!" The doctor blinked, surprised. One of the men from the escort stepped forward. "Sir, Nurse Carter is the best on the team," the sergeant said. I said someone else." Mason tried to raise his arm, but the movement elicited a groan that he swallowed through his teeth. "I don't want that. No." Hannah had already been mistreated because of pain, fear, prejudice, and confusion. But this was different. It wasn't, "I don't trust you." It was, "I can't let you see me." A refusal laden with shame. She felt the urge to turn back, hand the patient over to another nurse, and continue with the night. It would be the easiest way. But when she looked at his fingers, she realized his right hand was trembling, almost imperceptibly, as if his body were holding something bigger than the wound. Hannah breathed and tilted her head. "Colonel, I understand you want privacy. I can ask to reduce the team to the minimum necessary, but you are bleeding, and I can't let your chest close up without examining it." "I'm in charge here," he insisted, and that made some in the room hesitate. "Get someone else." The doctor looked at Hannah, his eyes pleading with her not to escalate the conflict. The emergency room was no place for ego clashes, especially not at the expense of rank. Still, Hannah didn't look away. "I'm not here to argue," she replied, firmly but without aggression. "I'm here to keep you alive." She gestured and spoke calmly to the team. "Trauma 1, no audience. 2 doctors, a technician, and me. Security can stay at the door, now." Most obeyed out of habit. The sergeant seemed relieved. The security officer didn't like it, but he stood outside, arms crossed. When only a few remained, Hannah pulled back the curtain around the stretcher. The sound of the emergency became muffled, as if the world had turned to cloth. Mason took a deep breath, his eyes fixed on the ceiling. "I don't want you here," he repeated more quietly, as if it were a disguised plea. Hannah brought the scissors close to the collar of his shirt. "Then tell me why," she asked, and her voice came out as if offering a way out. He remained silent. Only his chest rose and fell, shallowly. The doctor beside him began to assess his vital signs. "The pressure is dropping," the doctor murmured. "We need to open her up now." Hannah knew that every second counted. She cut the shirt with a precise movement. The fabric ripped open, revealing the compression bandage on the left side of her chest and a purplish area spreading across her collarbone. Mason turned his face away, as if that were worse than an explosion. Hannah carefully pulled back the bandage, assessing the injury. It was irregular, probably shrapnel, with contained bleeding, but there was crepitation in the skin, a sign of trapped air, partial pneumothorax, the kind of thing that seemed minor until it became a death sentence. She didn't have time to think about the insult, only about the procedure. "I'll need to insert a drain," she warned, maintaining a neutral tone. "It's going to hurt. We'll apply anesthetic." "No," he interrupted. "No sedation. Colonel, this is non-negotiable." "I said no." His gaze finally returned to her, and the fear was there. "Naked. I stay awake." Hannah felt a chill. This wasn't bravado, it was panic, a need for control. The doctor sighed. "Only locally," he said. "We have to act." Hannah prepared the anesthetic, warning of each step as if predictability were a refuge. "I'm going to clean it. You're going to feel cold." She touched his skin with gauze and antiseptic. Mason tensed. A muscle in his jaw twitched. That's when Hannah saw. When he moved his arm to try and cover his chest, the sleeve of his torn t-shirt slipped, and for a second, a sliver of his shoulder appeared, black and green ink, thin lines, a small symbol near his deltoid. It wasn't the traditional eagle, globe, and anchor emblem. It was something more discreet, almost hidden, as if it were a secret, a circle broken by an arrow, 3 letters, a number. Hannah's heart skipped a beat, a leap that didn't match the situation. That design was unusual, and if she hadn't spent part of her life surrounded by people who spoke in code, she would have ignored it. But she recognized that symbol. She recognized it because she had seen it on another skin, on another night, in another world. She recognized it because she had touched that same design with her blood-stained fingers, begging someone to hold on for another 10 seconds. Hannah stopped, the syringe in mid-air. "Colonel," she said slowly, "that tattoo on your shoulder." He stiffened. "Don't look at that," he growled. "Is he from your detachment?" "I told you to shut up." His voice grew louder, and the doctor raised his eyebrows, ready to intervene. Hannah felt the weight of the old rule. Don't mess with what belongs to unity. Don't touch what belongs to sisterhood. But she also felt something else. Her name was Hannah Carter, and somewhere in her past, that same combination of letters had been uttered on a radio amidst gunfire. She slowly removed the glove from her left hand, as if to show she had no weapon. Then she pulled the sleeve of her scrubs up to her forearm, on the inside of her arm, near her wrist. Hidden by the elasticity of the fabric was a small tattoo. The same circle, the same arrow, the same 3 letters, the same number. But below, there was a different detail, an extra mark, a short line, like a drawn scar. Mason turned his face away in a sudden movement, as if his body had reacted before his mind. His eyes widened. It wasn't a polite surprise, it was a visceral shock. "That," his voice broke for the first time. "No." Hannah breathed, and the air seemed short. "You recognize this symbol," she said softly. "You know what it means." The doctor looked from one to the other, confused. "What's going on?" Mason didn't answer the doctor. He stared at Hannah's arm as if he'd seen a ghost. "Doc," he whispered, almost inaudibly, and that word pierced Hannah like a blow. Doc. She hadn't heard that nickname in years, and yet it fit her like old armor. Hannah closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was no escape. "Yes," she admitted, her voice hoarser than she intended. "I was Doc." Mason's chest heaved in a soundless sob. You died." The doctor, seeing that the patient was getting worse, tried to pull Hannah back into the procedure. "We have to put the drain in. Now." Hannah nodded, returning to professional mode without deleting the rest. "I didn't die," she told Mason quickly, as if promising to explain later. "And you're going to let me help you, because you know I know how to do it." He swallowed hard. His hand, which had been trembling with anger, now trembled with something akin to relief. "Okay," he said, the words coming out subdued. "Okay, Doc." Hannah put her glove back on and continued. While she administered the anesthesia, while the doctor prepared the equipment, she spoke to Mason as she spoke to men in the field, directly, without exaggeration, with sentences that resonated deeply. "Breathe with me. Look at me. 1, 2, you're here." When the drain went in and the air escaped with a subtle hiss, the pressure in his chest seemed to ease. Mason let out a long sigh and closed his eyes, not from fainting but from exhaustion. The doctor stabilized the parameters and signaled to take the patient to the observation room. On the way, the security officer reappeared, looking angry. "Who authorized the reduction of my team?" "No one," Hannah replied without stopping walking. "But I just stopped him from stopping breathing. If you want to argue with my supervisor when the colonel is alive." The officer opened his mouth, but the sergeant stopped him with a look. The sergeant, who had seen the colonel's expression change when he saw Hannah's tattoo, seemed to understand that there was something bigger there. In the observation room, Mason was connected to monitors, his oxygen was adjusted, and his pain relief was controlled. The doctor left to register the incident and order tests. The sergeant stayed outside, acting as a silent guard. Hannah stayed behind. Alone, the air changed. Mason slowly opened his eyes. "I thought..." He stopped, as if his throat were rocked. "I thought I'd buried you in the desert." Hannah felt her stomach clench. The memory came back with the smell of dust and hot metal. "I know," she said. "I also thought I had left you there." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was full of things that couldn't be contained in a report. Mason tried to sit up a little, and Hannah placed her hand on his shoulder, gently but firmly. "Don't move. You're still too fragile." He obeyed, and that was already strange. A commander obeying without question. Why are you here?" he asked. "San Diego, Naval Hospital. I heard that you..." He swallowed. "I heard that you left, that you went away and never came back." Hannah leaned back in her chair, as if she needed to support her body. "I left," she confirmed, "after that operation." Mason closed his eyes, and a shadow crossed his face. "I tried to find you," he said. "I tried. I talked to too many people. I asked, and too many questions, and all I heard was silence, as if you didn't exist." "Because I wasn't supposed to exist," Hannah replied. "I signed papers, I changed departments, I was transferred, and then I quit." "You were corpsman," he murmured, as if repeating it would remind his own body. "You were the best. You ran through fire. You..." Hannah raised her hand, cutting the edge, because that compliment was like a knife. "I was bleeding too," she said, her voice coming out harder. "And I was scared too. And there was one day when I couldn't come back whole." Mason looked at her intently, as if he finally saw that she was no longer the 20-something girl who carried a first aid kit and cracked jokes to keep the team awake. "Hannah," he said her name carefully, as if asking permission. "What happened to you that day?" She stared at the heart rate monitor, as if the green lines were easier to discern than the truth. "Explosion," she said. "I was attending to Corporal Lewis. Do you remember him? The kid who talked too much and had a picture of his daughter on his helmet." Mason nodded, his face contorting. "I was holding him in my arms when the second wave came. I only remember the sound. Then everything went white. I woke up unable to feel my right leg and unable to hear from my left ear, and with the feeling that I had left you all in the middle of hell." Mason took a deep breath and turned his face away, as if trying to hide what was coming. "You didn't let us," he said, and his voice was that of a commander, but also of a man. "You saved us more than once." Hannah laughed humorlessly. "And I lost Lewis." Mason closed his eyes. A tear appeared, but he didn't let it fall. "I lost too." The sentence hung heavy between them. Hannah knew, looking at him, that the wound on his chest was recent, but the wound that made him tell him to get someone else was old. It was wounded pride, it was guilt, it was fear of being seen as weak by someone who truly knew him. She leaned over. "Why didn't you want me to answer you?" Mason opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. "Because I didn't want you to see me like this," he confessed, almost angry with himself. "I didn't want you to see me broken. I'm the guy who tells others to hang in there. I'm the guy who says, 'Get up.' And here I am with a chest drain shaking like a recruit." Hannah exhaled softly. "I've seen you broken," she said, "and you've seen me broken. That doesn't change what we've done. It just reminds us that we're human." Mason remained silent. Then his voice came out low. "There's something else." Hannah waited. "It wasn't just an incident in training," he said. "I was brought in because someone wants me to stay silent." Hannah's stomach clenched again. "Are you being threatened?" "I don't know the extent of it," Mason replied, his gaze hardening. "But I know someone sabotaged the operation. I know one of my men died because of a leak. And I have proof. I was going to hand it over to command tomorrow. Someone found out. Tonight, the ammunition truck exploded prematurely. I was nearby. It was meant to kill me, but I survived." Hannah felt the room shrink. She thought of cameras, hallways, the security officer. She thought of the phrase, "security of the command on the way," as a threat, not protection. "Did you tell anyone about this?" she asked. "No," Mason said. "I don't trust anyone outside of 3 people, and one of them was you when I saw that tattoo." Hannah pressed her fingers against her own lap. "Why me?" "Because you know what it means to carry a secret that can kill people," he replied. "And because you no longer belong to this system. You're out. And because you saved my life before, and I need someone to save it again." Hannah swallowed. Her life, painstakingly built after the separation, suddenly seemed like a building made of cards. "I'm a nurse," she said, as if trying to convince herself. "I'm not a researcher." "I don't need you to shoot anyone," Mason said. "I need you to keep me alive long enough for me to talk to the right person." Before Hannah could answer, a noise in the hallway. Hurried footsteps. Low voices. The sergeant opened the door a crack and spoke to someone outside. Hannah only caught fragments. "Without authorization. Order from command. Evacuate the colonel now." Mason tried to sit up, alarmed. "No," he whispered. "Not now." Hannah stood up and went to the door, opening it just enough to see the security officer and 2 men she didn't know, in dark suits with hard looks. "Immediate transfer," one of them said without identifying himself. "Superior order. The colonel will be taken to a secure facility." "He's not stable enough for transport," Hannah replied. "I have clinical criteria for—" "That's not a suggestion," the man interrupted. "You're a nurse. Do your job and get out of the way." Hannah felt the blood rush to her face, but she maintained control. She knew how to distinguish real authority from performative authority. This reeked of manufactured urgency. "I need to speak with the attending physician," she said, "and with the head nurse." "You're not going to talk to anyone," the man replied, then smiled humorlessly. "Unless you want to get into trouble." Behind him, Hannah noticed another detail. The sergeant was stiff, and his gaze suggested he didn't like it either. Hannah closed the door, her heart racing. Mason looked at her, his chest rising and falling, his breath the breath of someone who knows the storm has arrived. "Doc," he said, and the word was now a request. "They are not ours." Hannah knew. She felt it. And in that instant, it wasn't the nurse who decided. It was the woman who had run into the fire, who had learned to recognize the sound of a lie. She went to the monitor, pretended to adjust cables, Then she leaned over and spoke softly. "Can you walk?" Mason stared at her, incredulous. "With that on your chest?" "Slowly," she said. "But if they take you away from here, you won't come back, and neither will I." Mason closed his eyes for a second, as if calculating the risk. Then he nodded. "I have a flash drive," he said. "It's in the inside pocket of my vest. If it leaks, people die. I can't lose it." Hannah carefully pulled at his vest and found the compartment. She took out a small, unmarked black flash drive. She put it in her own pocket. "Okay," she said. "We're going to do this the way I did it on the field. Fast, quiet, no heroics." She opened a drawer and took out a simple jacket, the kind patients wear, and a cap. She carefully placed them on Mason, partially obscuring his face. Then she picked up a wheelchair. "You'll look weaker than you are," she murmured. "And that's a good thing." Mason let out a short, tense laugh. "You still give orders." "I always gave," Hannah replied, and pushed the chair back. When he opened the door, the men in suits were still in the hallway, impatient. The security officer glanced at the chair. "He will be transported on a stretcher," he said. "He had an episode of shortness of breath." Hannah lied, with the nonchalance she hated about herself. "I'll take him to radiology before the transfer. Doctor's orders." The doctor is traumatized by another patient," Hannah interrupted, her tone unasking. "Do you want me to stop here and argue while he's having a meltdown?" The man in the suit assessed Hannah, as if gauging her limits. His gaze fell on her name tag. For a second, Hannah saw a chance for him to ask for a name and derail everything. But then the sergeant beside her stepped forward. "I'll accompany her," the sergeant said quickly. "If the nurse says she needs x-rays, she needs them. The colonel isn't going to die on my shift." The man in the suit hesitated, and Hannah seized the opportunity. She pushed the chair aside, the sergeant beside her like a shadow. The security officer lagged behind, disgruntled. The men in suits followed, but belatedly. In the hallway leading to radiology, there was a blind spot for the camera because of renovations. Hannah knew why she worked there. When she reached the spot, she quickly turned onto a side door with a restricted access sign, pushed her chair inside and closed it. It was a room full of old equipment, boxes, and the smell of dust. Hannah locked the door and took a deep breath. Mason carefully stood up from the chair, leaning against the wall. The drain pulled, slightly, but held. "Doc," he whispered, with a smile that was a mixture of gratitude and absurdity. "You're kidnapping me inside a naval hospital." Hannah looked at him. "I'm keeping you alive, and I'm not going to explain that to anyone until you're safe." She took her cell phone out of her pocket and typed quickly. "I need someone from the hospital I trust," she said, and her head listed names. There was one person, the head of the night shift, Linda Perez, a former Air Force woman who hated bureaucracy more than pain. Hannah texted, "Linda, I need you now. Equipment room in hallway B, door with restricted access sign. Don't ask why, just come." Mason watched, trying to control his breathing. "If this goes wrong," he said, "you'll lose your license." "I can get my license reinstated," Hannah replied. "I can't bring dead people back to life." Footsteps outside, voices. "She went this way." "I saw the chair." Hannah turned off her phone screen and motioned for Mason to be quiet. He leaned against the wall, his hand near his chest but unarmed. The truth was simple. Inside a hospital, her weapon was the door. The doorknob turned. The door resisted because of the lock. "Open up!" shouted the man in the suit. Hannah didn't answer. She looked at Mason and saw something in his eyes. It wasn't just fear. It was the old discipline of a body ready to protect itself. But he was wounded, trapped in a space with no real way out. The doorknob turned again, harder, and then a sound of a magnetic card trying to open it. "They're going to come in," Mason murmured. "I know." Hannah breathed and looked around. There was a second door, small, almost hidden, leading to a maintenance corridor. "This way," she whispered. They moved. Mason walked slowly, but he walked. Hannah held his arm, feeling the strength still there. The maintenance corridor was narrow, yellow light, and smelled of metal. They advanced, while behind them the sound of the door being forced open grew louder. At the end of the corridor was a staircase leading to the basement, the generator area. Hannah went down with Mason, her heart pounding. Below, the sounds of the hospital seemed distant, as if real life were happening above and they were buried. "I've done this before," Hannah said, more to herself than to him. "Hidden routes, like the hospital was a labyrinth." Mason let out a short, tired laugh. "You always find a way." When they reached the generator area, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Someone had followed. Hannah stopped. The light flickered. She heard a familiar voice. "Carter! Hannah Carter! Is that you?" She was beautiful. Hannah exhaled, a quick relief. "Here." Linda stepped down 2 steps and stopped when she saw Mason. Her eyes narrowed. "My God," she murmured. "What have you done?" Hannah was blunt. "They tried to take him away without medical authorization. I think there are people infiltrating. I need help." Linda looked at Mason, then at Hannah. "Are you serious?" "I never joke around at 3 in the morning, Hannah said. Linda took a deep breath and pulled out a bunch of keys. "Okay, Doc," she said, using the nickname without knowing the weight. "What do you need?" Hannah felt the world fall into place for a moment. "An escape route," she said. "A way to get him to a safe place within the base, without going through the main corridors. And I need to call the doctor and the leadership without alerting the guys in suits." Linda nodded. "There's a service exit that leads to the employee parking lot, but there will be cameras. However," she smiled dangerously, "I control the nursing cameras. For 5 minutes they can go down." Hannah almost laughed. "Linda, I love you." "Not now," Linda replied curtly. "Later you can explain to me why you're running away with a wounded colonel." They moved. Linda opened a side door that led to a freight elevator. Inside, the air smelled of oil. Hannah pushed Mason inside and held her breath as the elevator slowly ascended. When the door opened on the ground floor, the hallway was empty. Linda pointed. "To the left, past the laundry room, is the service entrance. I'm going to turn off the cameras. You have 4 minutes." Hannah nodded. He pushed Mason, his body heavy but sturdy. They passed the laundry room, the sound of machines, the smell of warm clothes. The service door was there, with an iron bar. Hannah opened the door, and the cold air from outside hit her face. Employee parking lot. Few cars. In the background, the sky was beginning to lighten with a timid blue. Hannah's car was 2 rows away. She ran with Mason over there, opened the door, and helped him into the passenger seat, being careful not to pull out the drain. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Linda appeared in the doorway, looking around. "They'll miss you soon," she warned. "Where are you going?" Hannah swallowed. She didn't have a perfect plan. She only had instinct. "My house," she said. "I live 20 minutes away. I can keep him there for a few hours." "You're crazy," Linda replied. "I know." Linda placed her hand on Hannah's arm. "Listen, I'm going to handle this mess here. I'm going to call the chief physician and tell him there's an attempted irregular transfer, but you need to send me your address. If this turns into a manhunt, I want to know where you are." Hannah nodded, gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she said. Linda took a step back and pointed her finger. "And, Hannah, if you die because of a colonel, I'll kill you again." Hannah let out a nervous laugh. "Agreed." She got in the car and started the engine. Her hands were trembling now. She was running late. Mason looked at her. "You didn't need to." "I know," Hannah replied, and started the car. The road to her apartment seemed different at that hour. San Diego was waking up slowly, people rushing by, buses passing by, the world as normal. Hannah looked in the rearview mirrors every few seconds. Her trauma knew the habit. "They'll look for it," Mason said, as if he could read her mind. "I know. Do you have any idea what's on the flash drive?" "I don't want to know the details," Hannah replied. "I want to know how to keep you alive until you hand it over." Mason looked outside, his face tired. "I thought I'd buried all of this. I thought I'd left you behind. And now you're here, pulling me back in again." Hannah gripped the steering wheel. "You didn't pull me," she said. "I chose this. And if I chose it, I also choose when it ends. Hannah's apartment was simple, third floor, old building. She parked in the garage and helped Mason slowly climb the stairs because the elevator was noisy and drew attention. Inside, the place had books, plants, and an old photo on a shelf. A younger Hannah in uniform next to a group of smiling men without the weight of the world on her shoulders. The photo had been face down for months. She had never managed to throw it away. Mason saw the photo and stopped. That was before, he whispered. Hannah didn't answer. She led him to the sofa, placed cushions, adjusted the drain, checked the dressing. Her hand worked as if the body remembered on its own. "You need to eat and drink," she said, "and I need to check if you're not having internal bleeding." Mason exhaled. "You still talk like you're on the field." "I'm still the same," Hannah replied, and then bit her tongue because it wasn't true. She was the same, and she wasn't. Hannah's phone vibrated. A message from Linda. "They're freaking out. 2 men in suits trying to give orders. Chief doctor suspicious. Stay alert." Hannah replied with an address and a thank you that seemed too small. Mason observed. "You involved more people," he said. "She's trustworthy," Hannah replied, "and she'll give us time." Mason ran a hand over his face. "Tired." "Doc," he said, his voice trembling, "I don't know if I can hold this in. There are things I've seen, things I've carried, and now there are people trying to erase me as if I were a document." Hannah sat on the edge of the sofa close by, without intruding. "You are not a document," she said. "You are human, and I don't let humans become paper." He looked at her. His gaze softened, and something that seemed like old love, buried beneath discipline, surfaced for a second. "I never apologized," Mason said, "for what happened in that operation. I sent you back into the fire. You sent me, because that's what we—" "It did," Hannah interrupted, "and I went because I chose to. Don't put that on your shoulders like it's all your fault." Mason closed his eyes, and a tear escaped silently, as if his body were too tired to hold back the dam. Hannah felt a tightness in her throat. She stood up and went to the kitchen, because standing there looking at his pain was like facing her own. While she was putting water on to boil, she heard a knock at the door. 3 short knocks. 2 long ones. Hannah froze. It was an old code, a code from someone who knew she wouldn't open it for just anyone. She walked carefully to the door. She looked through the peephole. On the other side, a man in a simple base uniform, a familiar face, the sergeant who'd been with Mason at the hospital. Hannah opened it just enough. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "The guys in suits are lying," the sergeant said quickly, "and the security officer is on their side. I heard it. They want to take the colonel off the radar. I don't know where." "I followed you." Hannah hesitated. "Why should I trust you?" The sergeant rolled up his sleeve and showed a tattoo, the same symbol, but with a different marking. "Because I'm from here," he said, "and because the colonel saved my brother in Afghanistan. I'm not going to let him become a body in a body bag because of a politician." Mason appeared behind Hannah, leaning against the doorframe, pale but standing. "Rivas," Mason said, acknowledging. "You shouldn't be here." Rivas swallowed. "With all due respect, sir, I can't stay in the hospital pretending everything's all right." Hannah opened the door and let him in. Rivas looked around quickly, assessing possible exits. "They're coming," he said. "Not now, but soon. The head nurse is holding them off, but they're going to activate the chain of command, maybe military police, maybe outsiders." Mason took a deep breath. "I need to speak with General Lawson. Only him. But I need a secure channel." Hannah looked at the flash drive in her pocket and felt its physical weight. "Do you have contact information?" she asked Rivas. "I have a satellite phone from the unit," he replied. "But using this here, they can track it." Hannah thought quickly. "Is there a place on the base with no signal? A dead spot?" Rivas nodded. "Old warehouse near the docks. Metal structures. The signal dies there, but the area is patrolled." Mason looked at Hannah. "I don't want to drag you to the base." "You've already pulled," Hannah replied, her mood tinged with nerves. "And I'm not going to let you go alone." They prepared themselves in minutes. Hannah grabbed a backpack with basic supplies, Gauze, saline solution, painkiller, scissors, tape. She knew what could save a life. Rivas checked outside through the window and signaled. Hannah's car pulled out of the garage as if it were just another car in the morning. The military dock was 15 minutes away. Hannah drove with the calm of someone who had learned to drive with explosions in the distance. No sudden movements, no visible panic. On the way, Mason looked out the window and spoke softly. "I remember the first time you showed up on our team." Hannah didn't answer. She didn't want memories at that moment, but he continued. "You had an annoying smile," Mason said, "and you made fun of my haircut. I wanted to send you away on the first day." "You tried," Hannah replied without looking. "And you stayed," he said, "because you didn't obey when it was cowardly. You obeyed when it was necessary." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "And you wouldn't let anyone die when you could have prevented it." The warehouse near the docks was an old building, cracked concrete, smelling of rust. The sound of seagulls mingled with ship engines. Rivas opened the side door with a key that shouldn't have existed. Inside, the light was dim. The cell phone signal dropped immediately. "Here," Rivas said, taking the satellite phone out of his pocket. "I'm going to call the General's contact," but he stopped, looking at Mason. "They're going to ask why you're not in the hospital." Mason took a deep breath. "Because they tried to kidnap me in my own country." Rivas dialed. The ringing sound seemed too loud in the silence. While they waited, Hannah heard footsteps outside. Slow, measured. She turned around, her whole body becoming alert. "Mason," she whispered, "there's someone here." Rivas hung up and gestured for silence. The footsteps stopped near the front door. A voice came from outside. "Colonel Grant, we know you're there. This doesn't have to get ugly." The voice belonged to the man in the suit. Hannah felt her stomach churn. Mason closed his eyes, as if anger and pain had merged into a single fire. "Stay behind me," he told Hannah, an old instinct. "You can barely stand," Hannah replied, and her anger was fear. "I don't stand behind anyone." Rivas raised his hand, asking for calm. "They won't come in if they're not sure. They just want to intimidate." The voice from outside continued. "Nurse Carter, we know you're with him. You're interfering with a federal operation. Open the door. This will end better for you." Hannah felt her whole body burning. They knew her name. They had information. Mason looked at Hannah. "Sorry. Stop apologizing," Hannah replied. "Just make the call." Rivas dialed again, faster, and put it on speakerphone. The call connected with static. "Lawson Channel," a voice said dryly from the other end. Rivas spoke as if every word carried weight. "This is Rivas. Detachment. Validation code," he recited in sequence. The voice on the other end changed, more alert. "Rivas, what's going on?" Mason approached the phone, his breath short. "General Lawson," he said, his voice carrying command and urgency. "I am Mason Grant. They are trying to remove me from medical custody and silence me. I have evidence of sabotage and leaks. I need safe extraction and a debriefing channel outside the standard chain. Now." Hannah listened from outside, the sound of metal, as if someone were trying to tamper with the door. The general answered, his voice deeper. "Grant, where are you?" "Dockyard Depot," Mason said. "No signal. We have hostile people outside. I have compromising material. Are you alone?" Mason looked at Hannah and Rivas. "No. I have support. And Nurse Carter." There was silence on the other end. The general's voice came out slower. "Carter?" Hannah felt her blood run cold. "Did the general recognize that name?" Mason spoke, almost swallowing with pride. "Doc, the same." The general let out a sigh that seemed to hold years in his breath. "She's alive." Hannah closed her eyes for a second. It was as if a part of her had secretly hoped that someone would still remember. "Listen," the general said firmly, "don't open it to anyone. I'll send a trusted team. And Grant, don't trust anyone who gets there before my code. Understood?" "I understand," Mason replied. Outside, the man in the suite's voice grew more aggressive. "Last warning, we're going in!" Hannah looked at Rivas. He gestured for them to move away from the door. Mason tried to stand, but the pain made him lean against the wall. "You're not going to fight!" Hannah said, her voice low but firm. "You're going to breathe." "I won't let them get you," Mason murmured. "And I won't let them get you," Hannah retorted. "We're going to get out of here together." A loud bang. The front door shook. Hannah felt her chest tighten, and for a second the memory of the desert returned. Noise, dust, screams. She breathed as she taught her patience. "Look at me," she said to herself and to Mason at the same time. "Here, now, 1, 2. The door gave way on the third blow. Metal against metal. Light from outside streamed in. 2 men entered. One of them was wearing a suit. The other was in uniform, but not just any uniform. Hannah recognized him in his eyes, someone trained to obey without question. "Colonel," said the man in the suit, with a smile that wasn't a smile. "You're coming with us." Rivas stepped forward. "Who authorized this?" "Federal authority," the man replied and held up a document. "You have no jurisdiction." Hannah saw that the document was quick and generic. Paper can hold anything. Mason took a step, his body trembling with pain and anger. "You blew up a truck to kill me," he said, "and now you come with paper." The man in the suit gave a half smile. "You seem confused by the medication." Hannah felt the nausea rising. They were going to turn his lucidity into delirium. She took a step as well. "He's not sedated," Hannah said, "and I can testify to that." "You're a nurse," the man interrupted. "You don't witness anything. You just obey." Hannah felt the urge to hit back, but she restrained herself because her body knew. When someone wants you to react, the reaction becomes evidence against you. Then she did something else. She pulled up the sleeve of her scrubs again and showed the tattoo. "I don't obey when it's cowardice," she said, her tone low but heavy. The man in the suit frowned. "What is this?" Rivas saw him and stiffened. The second man, the one in uniform, glanced quickly and looked away. That meant he knew. Hannah pointed to the second man. "You know what it is. You know who you truly swore loyalty to. Do you really want to be the guy who walks into a room to take out a wounded commander and a nurse who has saved lives in your own unit?" The man in uniform hesitated. It was a split second, but that was all. The sound of a helicopter came from the distance, growing faster. Spotlight beams swept across the broken windows of the warehouse. The general's voice came through the satellite radio, loudly. "Blue Code 4, my team. I repeat, Blue Code 4. The man in the suit turned his face away, startled for the first time. "Damn," he whispered. Outside, boots screeched. Commanding voices rang out. The man in the suit took a step back and tugged at the arm of the man in uniform. "Let's go." The man in uniform hesitated again, looking at Hannah, and then he let go of her arm. "No," he said, "I'm not going." The man in the suit's eyes widened. "Are you crazy?" "I'm tired," the man replied, his tone suggesting he'd swallowed too much. "And I know what that symbol means. I'm not going to be the traitor." The man in the suit tried to run, but the general's team surged in like a wave. In seconds he was on the ground, handcuffed. The sound of metal, shouts, orders. The warehouse turned into a scene of capture. Hannah stood motionless for a moment, her body finally realizing that the immediate danger was receding. Mason slid against the wall, exhausted. Hannah rushed to him, holding him. "Hey," she said, and her voice came out softly now that she could. "Stay with me." Mason looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew you were still my doc." Hannah felt a tear escape and didn't try to hold it back. A woman in uniform entered, accompanied by 2 soldiers. She had the posture of someone in charge without shouting. "Nurse Carter?" she asked. "It's me," Hannah replied. "I'm Colonel Brooks," the woman said. "General Lawson's team. The general has requested that you and Colonel Grant be taken to a secure room immediately. And," she looked at Hannah with a strange glint, "he told me to personally thank you for being alive." Hannah swallowed, as if it had ripped a hole in her chest. "I didn't have much of a choice," she replied. "She did," Mason said, his gaze steady. "She always does." They were taken to a windowless room inside an administrative building. A table, chairs, water, silence. Mason was attended to by a discreet medical team, and Hannah accompanied him, making sure the drain was working properly and that the pain didn't become an enemy. Hours later, General Lawson entered. He was a man in his 60s, with grey hair and eyes that had seen the world crumble and rise again. Several times, when he saw Hannah, he stopped. "Damn," he murmured. "Hannah Carter." Hannah stood up reflexively. The general raised his hand. "No need," he said. "Here, we're just people." He moved closer, and for a second, Hannah saw something resembling guilt in his face. "I received the report from that operation," he said quietly. "I signed the document that got you kicked out. I thought it was for the best, but I never stopped wondering if I had abandoned you." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "I thought you had knocked me out," she said. "The system does that," the general replied, "but I haven't forgotten." And Grant, he never forgot either. Mason, seated, looked at the general. "Sir, I have proof," he said, and his voice returned to mission mode. "A flash drive with communications, names, money transfers, sabotage supply routes. They almost killed me for this, and they tried to use the hospital as a route." The general nodded. "I know, and I will crush that network, but I need you to hand it over calmly and tell me everything from the beginning." Mason looked at Hannah as if silently asking for permission. Hannah nodded. He placed the flash drive on the table. While the general read and asked questions, Hannah remained silent, listening. Not to the specific content, that was theirs, but to the way Mason spoke, the firmness, the indignation, the care for his men. Hannah realized that the wound in his chest wasn't what had made him tremble before. It was the weight of realizing that the enemy might be inside. When the debriefing ended, the general signaled for the room to clear, leaving only himself, Mason, and Hannah. "What happens now?" Hannah asked, her voice filled with fear of being a pawn again. The general looked at her seriously. "Now," he said, "we'll protect you both, and then we'll decide the future." Mason laughed humorlessly. "Does my future depend on a military tribunal? Your future depends on whether you survive what you know," the general replied. Hannah felt her stomach clench. "And me?" she asked. "I'll be accused of, I don't know, obstruction, patient kidnapping, anything." The general looked at Hannah and gave a small smile. "You're going to be recognized," he said. "You saved a commander and exposed an assassination attempt inside a military installation. If anyone tries to mess with your license, they'll have to go through me." Hannah didn't know whether she wanted to cry or laugh. She was too tired for any pure emotion. Mason looked at her. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. Hannah shook her head. "You owe me your life," she replied. "The rest, we'll see." In the following weeks, life became a sequence of secure rooms, identity checks, coded phone calls, and route changes. Hannah was removed from her job for administrative reasons, but she knew it was for her protection. Mason was hospitalized in a discreet ward, under the watch of people the general guaranteed were trustworthy. The network that had tried to silence him began to crumble one name at a time, like dominoes. Hannah spent her days between the hospital and her own apartment, now watched over by unmarked cars. She hated the feeling of being a target, but I hated even more the memory of having been invisible. Now she existed again, even if it was dangerous. One night, she entered Mason's room in the secure hospital and found him staring at the ceiling, the same posture as someone who is awake inside. "A nightmare?" she asked. Mason didn't answer immediately, then his voice came out low. "I saw Lewis today," he said. "In the dream. He asked me why," I continued. Hannah sat down in a chair nearby. "And what did you answer?" Mason turned his face and looked at her. "I said I continued because Doc continued," he replied. Hannah felt a pain in her chest, but in a different way. "I didn't continue because of you," she confessed. "I continued because I didn't know how to stop. I left because I couldn't listen to the radio anymore without trembling. I couldn't look at tattoos anymore without feeling guilty. I thought leaving was the only way not to die." Mason remained silent, absorbing it all. "And yet," he said, "you came back." Hannah laughed humorlessly. I came back because you showed up on my stretcher and told me to get lost." Mason smiled, and it was the first genuine smile Hannah had seen from him since the emergency room. "I was an idiot," he admitted. "You were a wounded commander." Hannah replied, "An idiot too, but that's secondary." He let out a short laugh and then became serious. "I texted, 'Get someone else,' because I thought that if I pretended you didn't exist, I wouldn't have to feel everything again," he confessed. "I didn't want to remember the desert. I didn't want to remember what I lost. I didn't want to remember that I failed you." Hannah took a deep breath. "You didn't fail me," she said. "The war failed. The system failed. We did what we could." Mason slowly extended his hand, as if asking for permission. Hannah placed hers on top. "I don't know how to do that," Mason said, his voice almost childlike with vulnerability. "Go back. Be normal." Hannah squeezed his fingers. "I don't know either," she replied. "But I do know one thing, one day at a time, one breath at a time, and I know you don't have to do it alone." Mason's eyes filled with tears, and he made no attempt to hide them. "You stayed," he whispered. Hannah felt the world spin a little. She never realized how much she needed to hear that. "I stayed," she confirmed. On the morning that General Lawson announced the network had been dismantled and the mastermind was in custody, Hannah was in the hallway when she saw Mason emerge from the room for the first time without looking like he was carrying a bomb in his chest. There was still pain, there was still surveillance, but there was also a kind of relief. He stopped in front of her. "Is it over?" he asked. "Nothing really. Ends," Hannah replied, "but this has diminished." Mason nodded. "Then I have a question." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Do you still have that photo face down?" he asked. Hannah felt her face burn. "Maybe." "Turn her over," Mason said, with the firmness of someone giving an order, but with a new gentleness. "Turn her over and leave her there, not to pretend it was easy, but to remember that you existed, that you were ours." Hannah swallowed. "And you? Are you going to stop pretending you're always in control?" Mason gave a small smile. "I can try if you teach me." Hannah exhaled. "I'm not a teacher." "You were," Mason said. "You taught a lot of men not to die. Now teach me how to live." Hannah felt tears threatening to well up, but she smiled. "Okay," she said, "but you'll have to put up with my coffee." "I survived Afghanistan," Mason replied. "I'll survive your coffee." Days later, in Hannah's apartment, she finally turned the photo over on the shelf. The smiling group appeared in the sunlight, and for a second she felt not only guilt, she also felt pride. She felt that the young woman in the photo had not been erased. Mason sat on the sofa, still bandaged, still being careful, but breathing like someone who wasn't running away. He looked at the photo and then looked at Hannah. "This symbol," he said, pointing to the tattoo on her wrist, "wasn't meant to be a reminder of death. It was meant to be a reminder of loyalty." Hannah nodded. "I used it as a form of guilt," she admitted. "Then change it," Mason said. "Use it as a promise." Hannah felt her heart clench. "A promise of what?" Mason stood up slowly and came over to her, stopping at a respectful distance, like someone who had learned not to intrude. "A promise that when someone says get someone else because they're afraid of being seen, you'll stay," he said. "And a promise that I won't send people away anymore when what I want is for them to stay." Hannah breathed, and the answer came effortlessly. "I'll stay," she said. Mason touched her wrist carefully, right over the symbol. "Me too," he replied. Outside, San Diego continued with its routine. Sea, traffic, people. Inside, two people who had learned to survive war were trying, for the first time, to learn to survive the silence. Months later, Hannah returned to work at the hospital. But something had changed. She was no longer just the nurse who performed procedures perfectly. She was someone who understood what happened when a patient didn't want to be touched. She knew that behind an aggressive order there could be a cry for help. On a rainy night, a young Marine rushed into the emergency room with a bleeding hand, yelling for no one to come near. His eyes were vacant, as if the war were still raging there. A new nurse looked at Hannah desperately. "He's being aggressive," the young woman said. "He won't leave anyone alone." Hannah approached slowly, her hands visible. "I understand," she told the Marine. "You're trying to protect yourself, but I'm not going to hurt you." The Marine spat out a bitter laugh. "You don't know anything." Hannah pulled up her sleeve and showed the symbol on her wrist. "I know enough," she replied. The Marine froze, and for a second the hospital was silent again, not from absence but from connection. Elsewhere, Mason Grant, now retired from active command and working as a security consultant to prevent leaks like that from happening again, received a message from Hannah. Today, a boy said, "Get someone else." I stayed, and he let me help. His symbol became a promise. Mason replied, "My doc never left. She was just waiting for the moment to remember that she could still save lives." Hannah read the message and smiled. She knew that nothing would erase the desert, the names, the screams. But now, when the night brought back memories, she had something beyond guilt. She had presence. She had a tattoo that was no longer an open scar, but a bridge. And whenever someone angrily tried to send her away, Hannah remembered Mason's look on the stretcher, the moment his tattoo appeared, the shock when he saw hers. That moment had changed everything, because in the end, it wasn't the chest drain that saved the commander. It was the silent proof of belonging, a hidden symbol that said, "I know who you are when you can't say it." And Hannah, the American nurse who was once just Doc on the radio, finally understood that some loyalties don't end when the war ends. They just change places. Sometimes they return to a brightly lit hospital where a commander growls, "Get someone else," trying to hide his own fragility, and a nurse lifts her sleeve showing her tattoo. The gem of unity says, without shouting, without negotiating with cowardice, "I've been here before, I'm staying."